Welcome to Pathways, the podcast where we explore career journeys and the valuable lessons behind them. Today, we are honored to host Mr. Faith Abidoun, Executive Director of UWC International, founder of Future Africa, and former leader at the Africa Leadership Academy. Faith has dedicated his career to shaping leaders and advancing impactful education. Faith, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, can't wait to dive in. We'd love to start by learning about your early career inspirations and what led you to take this remarkable path.
Well, I grew up in Nigeria, and a lot of the inspirations for the path that I followed come from my family and from the experiences I had growing up as a young man in Nigeria. Both of my parents work in education. My mom was a high school teacher, and she retired as a principal of a high school. After 35 plus years of my mom's career in education, and my father also worked in a university. And after 35 plus years of working in a university, I think education's been in my family. It's been part of my upbringing and a path that I have always seen as a way to help to evolve a person's journey and help them become a better fit for society. But also growing up in Nigeria at the time when I did, we were living through persistent political instability. We had military coups, economic downturn, and just an absolute breakdown of social quality of life. And anyone who was living through that or experiencing that in some way, I think would have felt inclined to play some kind of a role in helping to make a difference in society. And the first outlet that I had through my schooling was the outlet of journalism. I used to write, and I joined the Young Writers Club when I was in high school. And it was a space for me to practice the skill of communicating what I was feeling, or at least how I wanted to make a difference in society. When I went to university, I continued my work as a writer, this time in a more formal way. I became an actual journalist. And from there, I had a chance to interview some world leaders, some national leaders in my country. I had a chance to practice some kind of advocacy through the media. And so my very first career path professionally was as a journalist. And of course, that evolved over time when I realized that I wanted to be more involved in doing things than writing about things. And that led me to pursuing a career in social entrepreneurship where I was organizing projects and leading an organization that was trying to make a difference on the things that bothered us the most. And before long, I found my way back to education because education is still the most powerful way in which we can change society. And it's been a privilege to have built my career around working in the media, working in social entrepreneurship, and working in education. And everything I still do today revolves around those three broad areas of learning how to communicate a desire for change, doing the work that actually creates change, and then educating more people to be able to sustain that change. And that's how I have approached my career.
This sounds quite interesting and good to know about you. And how was your early life, especially like your shift from being a journalist to a social entrepreneur? And did you have any specific role model that you thought about when you were doing this shift, or did you just feel like it?
There wasn't any particular role model. There are lots of role models in my life, and not necessarily because of a shift from journalism to social entrepreneurship or working in education. I've always been inspired by people, leaders around me. You know, depending on where a person finds themselves, they're likely to find models around them. And when I grew up in Nigeria, yes, I had models who had thrived and were very successful in journalism first before making a shift into other spaces. A couple of them I worked with, a couple of them I knew and respected from a distance. A few names might not really resonate with you because in the Nigerian context they'll be quite popular, but outside of the context, maybe not so much. But generally in my life, I've been very privileged to work with people who had worked across multiple sectors and who had made a difference. And so, many times we look for role models with, big names, big profiles, and famous people. Most times we are actually influenced a lot more by people who are directly visible to us, people who are around us. And that was my story. It was people who were in my workplace, my bosses at work, people whom I knew socially, my father, those were the people who were influencing my journey a lot more at a direct level. Uh, but globally, if we think about the kinds of people whose career paths were inspirational to me, people whom I learned from a distance, there are lots of books that I read from people who were entrepreneurs generally. So people like Richard Branson was a person whose books I was reading quite a bit as I was coming up, realizing, a person who was able to overcome what was perceived then as a personal disability or some kind of a dysfunction. Richard Branson is dyslexic. And in many ways, when he was going through school, dyslexia was perceived to be a disability or something negative to avoid. But he's found a way to recast his experiences um, as a superpower, the ability to focus on different things, and then go on to create what is one of the world's most successful business networks, conglomerates, and massive brand in the Virgin Group. And so people like that were distant um, mentors because I had a chance to read and discover them through books. Uh, Politically, or at least shaping my social consciousness, I read many of the speeches of Martin Luther King. He didn't really write books, but he had speeches, and being able to immerse myself in the advocacy for social justice as much as political emancipation in the United States. I think that was giving me a bit of internal drive, a desire to connect dots. Martin Luther King was a minister, was a Baptist preacher, but he had a chance to transcend that and really advocate for economic growth and social emancipation of people. And so, of course, like many people, you look at that as a figure, a figure of hope, someone whose story was very powerful and was doing a lot of things in his young age. And so that was from a distance. But to be honest, I can name drop a lot more famous people. But the real truth was it was the people who were closest to me that really inspired me and got me wanting to do something better with my life.
Thank you for those valuable insights. And you told me about your career as a journalist, how you started interviewing like impactful people. Did you face any challenges in your early career, and how did you overcome it?
Oh yes, I did. I faced challenges in my early career. And some of the challenges were internal, self-belief for a young person working in what is perceived as a profession of adults, a profession with people who are far more experienced than I was. As a young journalist, it wasn't strange to not really be respected. I was working for a very popular media brand called The Guardian in Nigeria as a reporter. And people expected to see someone who was a lot older than I was, as a reporter coming to report on a story or conduct an interview. And so that was partly internal, that I just wasn't so sure of myself because I knew I didn't really look like the image of people who were more experienced than I was. And a bit of it was external, having people who did not expect me to show up and almost wanted to treat me like a young person and say, oh, it's nice to see people like you trying things out. But I wanted to be respected as a professional. That was part of it. The second part of it is just balancing multiple things. The job of a journalist is 24/7. And, then many people want a job where you go to the office at 9 a.m. and close at 5 p.m. But for many of the journalists whom I knew, they were working all day, all night, chasing stories, writing stories throughout the night. No public holidays, no weekends, always on the job. And so just having to really build that work ethic was quite a stretch. The third thing about my work at the time as a journalist was, you know, just the hazards of constantly moving up and down the country in a time when it wasn't very politically safe or, social safety itself was a risk and just frequently been on the road of getting up at odd hours of the night to travel, a couple of hours to go meet an appointment, get an interview done. One of my most famous interviews was with the Nobel literature winner, Nobel Prize for Literature, Wole Soyinka, very famous, perhaps one of the most famous Nigerians and famous Africans, was the first Black African to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986. I had a chance to interview him, and it took me 8 months to get that interview. So things like that were quite challenging as a young person. But I think what allowed me to come through that period safely and with my head held high was being propelled by a sense of what was possible. I wanted to do something significant in my life. It wasn't about being popular, it was about being significant, being valuable, creating something of worth, and seeing other people around me who had begun to achieve that and been inspired by the stories of other people. I really immersed myself at that time in the stories of young, successful entrepreneurs. There were lots of names that were quite familiar to me, and I had a desire to find success. It didn't matter how early I found it or what kind of success it was, but I wanted to find success, and seeing that other people had done it. And one of the things I used to tell myself is that no matter how young you are, someone younger than you has found greater success. There are just lots and lots of stories of people who had done things. So again, that's that balance between internal pressure and external pressure. I wanted to do things, and society also didn't expect good enough things of me at a younger age. And so those are some of the things that I think propelled me. But also, mentorship was powerful. It didn't matter how much I pushed myself. I was supported a lot by lots of professionals, people who believed in me because they had seen me demonstrate the potential to make a difference. And none of us in life is self-made. Nobody is self-made. Someone has helped you at some point in your life. And so I had the support of teachers, of mentors, leaders. Everywhere I've gone, I've had people who've propelled me and told me they believed in me. And that has really helped me push on even when I was not really believing in myself. I've always had people who reminded me that I had great potential, and that's made all the difference in my life.
Thank you, Mr. Faith. Now, moving on from your career, like in education and in journalism, I wanted to ask, how did it feel like? Because one of our valuable goals of this podcast is to learn how to shift from education and from university to a new thing, to career, to work, to professional environment. How did it feel like for you?
I think ultimately, each of us, as we grow up, we will have exposure to newer opportunities. It's like life almost has a defined calendar of some sort. You spend most of your first, you know, 20, 22 years in some kind of study, primary school, secondary school, university for the vast majority of people. Of course, some people drop off after primary, some drop off after secondary. But for most people, you have those first, 20, 23, 25, in some cases up to your 30s, focused on study. And almost afterwards, once you're finishing your late teenage years and approaching your 20s, people begin to think about that transition to the world of work, and your attention begins to shift. It means you're looking for different things. Your brain is a lot more attuned to those things, and then you identify opportunities and you try to capitalize on them. It was very much the same for me. Growing up, everyone would ask you questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And most times people just repeat what they have seen in books or in the media. And so everyone says, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a computer scientist, I want to be a pilot. Just kind of name brand jobs. I never met anyone growing up who said they wanted to be an economist. I never met anyone who said they wanted to be, a fine artist, visual arts or computer game creator. Those things were not really being talked about. We just went for the big name brand kind of titles. And so I think there's something natural about that shift from schooling into the world of work where you begin to try to organize your own personal attributes, try to organize the skills you have developed, the passions you have begun to articulate in some kind of way. and then you see what kind of job or career path might be defined out of this persona that I have. And so I went through that. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but maybe for just a minute. I let go of medicine very quickly. I spent more time thinking I wanted to be an engineer. Um, but I wasn't very good at chemistry and physics. I was great at many other things, but chemistry and physics kind of stressed me quite a bit. And so it became quite difficult for me to envision myself as an engineer if I really couldn't do those subjects as well in school as I wanted to. But on the flip side, language, the English language, geography, economics, social sciences, those came just so naturally to me. I was great at them. Writing came so easy to me. I loved to articulate things. I spent my time in the library. I studied dictionaries for fun. I read newspapers every single day. Encyclopedia were my thing. So there was this natural affinity for the social sciences, for the humanities, but a lot more challenge around the physical sciences. So as I envisioned and approached my career, I gravitated more towards the area of my strength and less away from the areas of challenge or a bit more difficulty. And so that's kind of the same advice I might give to people who are beginning to imagine their careers and wondering what kind of work they would do. All of us have natural giftings. We have innate abilities, things that come a little bit easier to us than other things. And then each of us is also inspired or influenced by our immediate environment, things we see people doing, things we watch in the media, things that look like they'll be highly rewarding financially as career paths. And then we begin to marry this internal worldview, this persona of who we are, with what we see as desirable or accessible. In some way in there, you would define the first career path you pursue, or whatever you study in university might also lead you towards that direction. So I'd say play to your strengths, do a lot more of what you do the best, and you will find the intersection of joy, something that really gives you joy, something that you are really good at, and something that makes a difference. Somewhere in that triangle, something that gives you joy, something you are good at, and something that makes a difference. If you find a career path in that intersection, you're very likely to succeed.
Thank you for those words. And then, how did it feel like to move from studying in the US and then to South Africa with the opportunity with African Leadership Academy? How did it feel like to work with students at a young age, mostly high schoolers? And what 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 do you think the most impactful thing you did during your career at ALA?
Even before I went to the US, I had been working in secondary education. I'd been a teacher at three schools in Nigeria. And when I went to the US, I was also a volunteer teacher at a middle school in New York State. So I've always been in education for right now on 15, going on 20 years. I'd had a chance to teach. I'd had a chance to build curriculums. I'd had a chance to be a mentor. And some of the people who were my students, back in 2010, 11, are people whom I'm still quite close to, actually, as far back as 2008. People whom I'm still quite close to today, almost 20 years down the line. I think about the work in education as a calling, a real life pursuit, the chance to influence and shape a person's life, not just on the actual subject matter that is being taught. So I was an English language teacher, I was a geography teacher, I was a communications teacher, and then I taught international relations as well. So teaching different subjects, working with people, the most important thing was that influence, the personal influence on the life of a young person. And so making the move to Johannesburg was largely, again, that intersection of a passion to make a difference in someone's life and also to pursue a career path that was meaningful to me. The mission of the African Leadership Academy for me was very attractive. The same way people talk about UWC, I went there for the mission. The idea at that time that we could develop leaders for Africa from the bottom up, from multiple sectors of society, from multiple geographies, and that they could attend this academy regardless of their financial means. I found that very desirable. And I was privileged enough to be offered a position that allowed me to begin to transmit my own ideas for leadership development in a space where people were prepared for it. And the time I spent at the academy, almost a decade, was just fascinating. I was a part of many successful things, and so maybe there isn't a single one that stood out above all else. I had a chance to teach in the classroom. I had a chance to develop curriculum, which still is being taught today. I had a chance to serve as a mentor to the Model United Nations group, so I was an MUN coach. And then I had a chance to develop the Model African Union, which we pioneered at that academy in 2013 and still runs today, more than 10 years down the line. I was very proud of that work. I had a chance to lead communications for that academy. I had a chance to co-develop and lead the marketing team. I had a chance to work in student recruitment, helping to identify the young leaders who would shape the continent's future. I was a part of many things. I was involved in fundraising as well, helping to build good relationships with people who would support, and through introductions that I made, being able to actually attract donations to the academy to support students. Above all else, just being a good member of staff, being a good adult in the community, and being able to influence people and shape young people's paths. And many of the young people that I worked with over the time that I was there, still in my life, still very close to me. So I take a lot away from the years that I spent there. It was a transformational period. I was glad to be a part of something so powerful, so influential for Africa. And now here we are being able to draw connections from the work that we did there and the work that I'm doing today. And so it just really, really productive time of my life, and I'm proud of what I was a part of.
Yeah, so I can tell from the goal of ALA that probably what attracted you the most. I appreciate like how you helped developing a new curriculum, and I think the MUN club is still quite successful. Recently, UWC East Africa got an invite for the simulation that's happening in March, and yeah, I also looked about you talked about the social entrepreneurship and Future Africa initiative. Can you talk more about it? Show like showcasing the leadership that you had during that time. What is the concept and how did it feel like to work with that team?
A lot of what we designed with Future Africa, and I say we because it was a team of people that worked with me as founder. A lot of that work came out of the work we had begun to pioneer at African Leadership Academy. So when I joined African Leadership Academy in 2012, I became the Model UN coach, and then within 4 months, began to work on the concept of the Model African Union. Organized the first conference in March of 2014, April 2014, and then for 8 years successively, we were able to organize that conference. And then at some point halfway through that, we began to imagine what was next. The vision of the Model African Union was to bring together young high school students who had passion for the future of Africa, especially politically and economically, to step away from just cursory research or cursory analysis of African, and people speak in very broad terms, and everyone's desire is always, the government must do better and spend more money on education, just very top level solutions, mindsets. And I wanted people to have more awareness about how things really work. I wanted people to be able to do a little bit more research and begin to put themselves in the shoes of those who they would eventually replace. And that was the vision for that simulation. And it became very successful. And I think it became the fastest growing program in the academy, the number one attraction for many students. It became such a big deal. But of course, I knew it wasn't sufficient. It was good enough for the high school level, but it wasn't sufficient for really developing a generation of people who will step into public sector roles and make a difference. And that's where Future Africa was born out of. It was that desire to help more young people transition into leadership roles on the continent and preparing them far ahead of their time, if possible. And so we developed four programs that allow us to help young people evolve into the kinds of leaders that Africa needs. The Future Africa Ambassadors program is designed for young people at the high school age and transitioning out into university. And that's largely about just early introductions into the African public sector. And then the second phase is really about the Future Africa Scholars Program that's designed for people who want to take a research-based approach to analyzing and developing solutions to African development challenges. The third program is the most extensive. That's the Future Africa Fellowship. And that's an immersive program designed for people who are emerging into public sector roles and people who want to actually begin to practice public sector leadership. The fourth program is a Future Africa Forum, which is a public speaker series in which we invite people who have served in leadership positions in the public sector to help transmit ideas and introduce the concept of actual daily public sector leadership to those who would like to learn from them. So combined, this network now has a footprint in more than 30 African countries and continues to grow. And it's one of my joys that something that I am a part of can really help to develop a newer generation of conscious African citizens, and a number of whom will actually approach the public sector roles and seek to make a difference in their own lifetimes. So that's just one of the things that I'm a part of, and really proud to have played a role in helping to bring it to life.
Uh, yeah, that's quite interesting to see more leaders from African countries. I really love the idea about the social entrepreneurship and how is it going. And now coming to one of the most exciting questions that I was thinking about, which is how did you shift from from ALA to UWC? And can you talk, tell us more about what do you do as an executive director, or maybe share with us a day in the life of UWC Executive Director. Thank you.
I think the transition from African Leadership Academy to UWC is a bit seamless, to be honest, because the mission is very similar. The approach to education is very similar. The inspiration for African Leadership Academy was partly born out of UWC. And so, having spent that amount of time working at ALA, I think I had very good preparation for UWC. In my role as the executive director, there are different parts to the job. UWC International is an organization that works at the center of the UWC movement. And the UWC movement involves lots of organizations, lots of players. You've got the 18 schools and colleges that we have across the world. We've got our national committees that have operate in about 155 plus countries and territories. You've got lots and lots of alumni, about 85,000 alumni in different parts of the world, many of whom are passionate and continue to believe in UWC. And lots of partner organizations, lots of supporters, financial, organizations, education, etc. So we are a very massive, extensive, growing movement of people with a singular mission. And so the job of executive director is to work at different levels. First of all, to lead the UWS International Office that serves the movement. That's part of my work, a daily leadership, organizing a senior management team and bringing in the staff and supporting them to do the work they do around education support, around fundraising, around communications, around national committee support, all of that area, all those areas of work are one part of my job. The second part of my job is really about supporting the global governance of UWC. We have a very strong board, a very strong council, and so there are lots of leaders in the UWC structure globally. And so there's a lot of coordination work around governance of the UWC movement. Another part of my job really is about, providing adequate support and leadership to the UWC entities, the schools and colleges, the national committees, being able to develop and communicate a strategic vision and being able to provide ongoing support to them at different times. And so I'm often spending some time at a school or a gathering of national committees, at graduations, at fundraisers, different events and touch points that help to bring um, a shared narrative, a story of collective success to the rest of the UWC movement. And then the final part of my job really is about taking the message of UWC to the rest of the world. And either at a conference or at an event or working with donors or with the media or some partner that helps to amplify the voice of UWC into the rest of the world, and vice versa, to bring them also into the UWC world as well. So there is no typical day in the life of an executive director. All the days are different, but I will mostly always be working in one of those four areas, which is leading the international office, coordinating governance, or providing support or guidance or leadership to the UWC movement, or representing the UWC movement externally. Those will be four broad areas in which the work is being done.
Yeah, so basically, being an executive director is all about adaptability and being able to work with a team. And yeah, this looks quite interesting from a student perspective. Now we're coming into our last words. I want to thank you, and to conclude, do you have any words for our students, the people who are listening to our podcast, and any thanks to give?
I'm grateful that you've invited me to share a little bit about my experience and in extension to also be able to speak to UWC students and other people who believe in the UWC mission. I think above all else, the mission of UWC is paramount. It's a desire to make education a force, unite people, nation, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. Over time, people who have come to UWC have largely been attracted by that mission. And then as they go on, they ask themselves continually how they are living up to the mission. They challenge themselves to live out the mission. My message to you and your peers and everyone else who listens is to really evaluate themselves in light of that mission and ask yourselves, what can I do in my own lifetime to make a difference positively wherever I find myself? It's not about the title of the job you hold or about the country in which you live. It's about how much of a difference you can make to the people who are next to you. None of us is too young, none of us is too old to make a difference. And no difference is too small. As long as one person's life is transformed by the work that you do, as long as you're helping to leave spaces better than you found them, I ask people to commit themselves to a cause that's greater than themselves. And if you do that, you have this North Star sense of direction, pulls you forward each time. For me, it's been a huge honor to see many people in the UWC system. I've met students from every generation. I've met alumni from the very founding class of 1962 to young kids who are in UWC schools today. I've met with parents, with our supporters. We are all believers in the mission. Many of our volunteers do this work without any kind of compensation, but just joy in their hearts and belief in the potential of young people to make a difference. So let's carry on believing in the mission. Let's find spaces to make a difference. And let's tell other people about what we have been a part of. UWC will live for very, very long if all of us play our parts in making it so. So thank you so much for inviting me. And I wish you all the best with the program.
Thank you, Mr. Faith, for accepting our invitation. I know you have such a busy schedule. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for all of the listeners that were. I'm pretty sure they were amazed by this conversation, especially your career, and I think your advices are quite valuable for all of us. Uh, this was our first episode. I'm honored to have Mr. Faith. I'm honored to have Mr. Hinek Drenka as our technical assistant. And yeah, this is the end of it. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day, sir.